On February 14, 2020, 5 classmates of Dalhousie's Master Planning Program embarked on a 9-day journey to Berlin, Germany for this year's international field trip. This field trip course is designed for students to have the opportunity to explore and experience both the current and historic state of planning within an international context. Berlin was chosen due to our interest in the city's profound modern history. With this interest in mind, the purpose of our trip was to learn more about Berlin's modern history and how it has shaped the city in terms of planning. As one of the most liberal cities in Europe, we first wanted to ask ourselves, how did the city become what it is today due to its renowned history, and how has planning been evolved throughout the process? We also sought to find out how Berlin presently conducts planning, how this contrasts with North American planning ideology, and how the city's current planning tactics have shaped Berlin as it is known today.
Berlin grew from a pair of two fortified towns called Alt-Berlin and Cologne, located around the current location of Museum Island on the banks of the Spree River. From foundation in the 13th century and amalgamation into Berlin in 1709, the city grew into the administrative and economic center of the Kingdom of Prussia. The Haubridge Plan of 1862 laid down the framework for Berlin's urban development. Inspired by Paris, Vienna, and London, it had a street layout of boulevards, squares, and open green spaces connected by large radial boulevards. In the 1920s, Berlin annexed outlying cities, towns, and agricultural regions. The rise of Nazi Germany led to Albert Speer's 1938 plan for Germania. It was an imperial capital of monumental arches, government halls, large plazas, and boulevards. A Rome on steroids. The two most prominent works that exist from this era are Tempelhof Field and the Olympic Stadium. The end of World War II led to the destruction of much of Berlin. In 1949, the city was divided between West and East Germany. Both West and East Berlin were led by drastically different planning documents. In East Berlin, priority was given to the development of industrial and housing areas through the formulation of 16 principles that followed a modernist approach to development. The large boulevards and plazas of old were repurposed for mass gatherings and parades. The television tower in Alexanderplatz was built as a symbol to challenge the West, and planning documents often excluded the other half of the city completely. Despite this, planners envisioned a future reunion with the East. Land use plans were softly marked with connection points, and no construction was permitted that would have impeded the reunification of Berlin. After the fall of the wall, a new shift in reconstituting Berlin as a whole arose as the government moved from Bonn. Developed by architect Hans Stimman, critical urbanism, also known as New Simplicity, was a throwback to the strict grid and dense land use patterns of the pre-World War I era. Some of the projects developed and reconstructed included the Reichstag Parliament building, the Pariserplatz next to the Brandenburg Gate, and the high-end shopping avenue, Friedrichstrasse. In order to evoke memories of the past and fearing uncontrolled development, high-rise skyscrapers were rejected in the central city and replaced with 5 to 6-story buildings of traditional stone construction. In recent years, the aim for the redevelopment of Berlin involved the critical restructuring of the urban fabric instead of a more radical approach. Nevertheless, after over 150 years, the Haubridge Plan has come full circle.
In 1945, the victors of the war divided Germany into two separate countries. The Federal Republic of Germany, also known as West Germany, was governed by the Allied forces, which included the UK, US, and France. The German Democratic Republic, known as East Germany, was governed by the Soviets. Berlin, though technically located in East Germany, was similarly divided amongst the four occupying powers. Although divided into 4 sectors, Berlin was initially considered one city, governed jointly by all 4 nations. However, in 1948, the city of Berlin was split in half as the political ideologies of the East and West clashed. East Berlin became the political capital of East Germany, while Bonn became the capital of West Germany. Over the next decade, West Berlin became a refuge for people fleeing East Germany, which had been riddled with social and political turmoil. By 1961, more than 3.5 million East Germans had fled to West Berlin since the end of World War II. To prevent further loss to their labor force, East Germany began construction on the Berlin Wall in 1961, which strictly regulated movement between the two cities. The Berlin Wall became a symbol of the division caused by the Cold War. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 quickly prompted the reunification of Germany in 1990. Berlin was made the capital of the reunified country. Today, the federal parliament meets at the historic Reichstag in the refurbished plenary chamber designed by Norman Foster.
During the trip, the team was able to visit one of Berlin's most famous attractions, the Museum Island. We were able to visit the area on our own, as well as having a guided tour by Dr. Ralph Nitschke and Susan Teeter. The 5 historical buildings on Museum Island were built between 1830 and 1930. They reflect the 100 years of museum architecture, carrying magnificent collections that illustrate the development of humanity from prehistoric times up to the 19th century. During World War II, the collection was broken up and many of the buildings were damaged. Under the Peruvian Cultural Heritage Foundation, Germany was able to begin reunifying the collections of the national museums in Berlin. In the planning phase of the restoration of the Neues Museum, it was apparent that decisions could not be made without treating the buildings on the island as a complete unit and therefore creating the Museum Island Master Plan, which was approved in 1999. The master plan includes a complete renovation and modernization of all the existing parts, a new area devoted to welcoming and guiding for visitors, the creation of new connections and courses, the relocation of museum-related internal functions, and lastly, the creation of outside spaces. As planners, it is important for us to visit the island and meet the people who are working on this plan to better understand the significance that the Museum Island has on Germany. It was interesting to learn about how old and new can mix and how one can restore history but also create new historical moments. We were also able to visit a city planning and architecture firm, TSPA. The founder of TSPA is Thomas Stelmach, who has done a lot of work with UN Habitat and is an expert in sustainable urbanism. The firm is based in Berlin and has done a lot of local and international work, including projects in Beirut, Moscow, Cape Town, and many more. We learned that their vision and goal of sustainability is unique compared to many planning firms in Germany. Their work focuses on having a creative approach and using data to propose bold projects, with making sure to have deep research done on a project prior to developing a design of sorts. The firm also focuses on creating sustainable designs and taking well-tested planning traditions and essentially combining them with new technology. The structure of planning is quite different than what we had learned in planning practice, but what typically occurs is that the municipality hires large consultants to put out a competition and they run large city projects, and they are the ones hiring firms such as TSPA to produce the work for the municipality. Thomas's priorities, principles, and vision allow the firm to work in an environment and on projects that are meaningful, that make sure to also have a positive impact on its community members. Whether it was during our guided tour or our own walks that we took, we saw the importance of open spaces in Berlin. Open spaces are large components in planning, and these spaces are not always incorporated in the everyday lives of people. The famous Brandenburg Gate is a highly visited landmark. With the attraction, the space around the gate became a large public space free of vehicles. The gate has turned into a symbol of unity, and the public space it provides enhances the unification of everyone there. Another example of the importance of open spaces to Berlin is the Tempelhof Airport. The Tempelhof Airport was the first airport in Berlin, designated in 1923 and then ceased operations in 2008. The airport building itself is closed, but the open space around the area is now open to the public. The Tempelhof Field was open to everyone in 2010 and is one of the world's biggest inner-city green spaces. The areas of which were once used for planes are now 300 hectares of green space for skating, strolling, kite surfing, which we did witness when we were there, and much more.
Berlin's transportation can be accurately described as high-quality multimodal, offering residents world-class options to walk, cycle, and take local public passenger transport around the city. Only 1 in 3 people in Berlin have a car, however, almost everyone has a bicycle. In comparing Berlin to our native North American context, we as a group were amazed with the amount of bike-specific infrastructure in the landscape, including the large amount of bike lanes, but also the large width of them as well, that allowed cyclists to pass others in the bike lane with comfort. Another thing we noted was how the city creatively accommodated the large need for bike storage. Bikes were stored in massive racks in the middle of major plazas, in front of shops and restaurants, and underneath the bridges of the S-Bahn and U-Bahn passenger transport modes. Berlin also has an expansive network of public passenger transport. Altogether, the 4 public options of S-Bahn, U-Bahn, tram, and bus cover 2,600 kilometers and have more than 7,600 stations, including the largest Berlin Central Station, which also acts as a regional hub for long-distance rail travel to other German cities as well as the rest of Europe. Berlin's public passenger transport can be characterized as fast, reliable, and efficient compared to the context of North America. However, the state still sees room for improvement and are investing 2 billion euros per year until 2035 into local transport options as a way of proactively approaching expected increases in demand during the 2030s. The investment will go towards increasing frequency, track coverage, and renovating aging infrastructure. In looking at Berlin transportation, we found that while the city has a very impressive network of different transportation options that cater well to the needs of Berliners, there are still some problems that should be addressed. The first we recognize was that the majority of transportation stations, as well as sidewalks and train platforms, are inaccessible to people with disabilities or lessened mobility. Many of the stations were up or down a set of stairs and did not have elevators. Additionally, many sidewalks and paved surfaces were uneven or had physical barriers in them that would prevent anyone in a wheelchair from using them.
To conclude, our group has learned that Berlin's history has had a substantial impact on how their urban landscape has been shaped throughout time. We have learned that Berlin is a city with an abundance of creativity. In addition, it continually strives to progress into something that differentiates itself from other cities across the world. With its rich history, Berlin does not aim to shy away from its past. Today, Berlin combines its history with their planning endeavors through the integration of monuments, museums, and public spaces to remind themselves of their mistakes. Berlin has used this as a tool to continue moving forward and ultimately evolve into a city that people will love, feel welcome, and most importantly, understand the wrongdoings of their past.